Lifestyle Pirates with Big J and Adriano.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this week's episode of Lifestyle Pirates. We hope you are all well out there. Thank you for tuning in. This week we're joined by marketing consultant in HR and technology, Liz Funzale. Welcome along.
Thank you.
Did I pronounce it okay?
You did, yeah.
Nailed it. Thank
Nailed
you.
it.
Awesome, John.
Well, we've done about 4 takes of it. Thanks for coming along this morning, Liz. Much appreciated. Now, you are a lady of many hats and have one hell of a journey, which I'm really looking forward to talking about this afternoon on Lifestyle Pirates. Originally from South Africa.
Yep. Moved here about 3 years ago.
Whereabouts in South Africa?
So I grew up in a small town called Newcastle, which is like 300 kilometers inland, and then 300 kilometers from Johannesburg, so right in the middle.
Yep.
And then moved to Johannesburg when I was 17. And the next stop was Sydney.
Wow, okay. And you moved over here, you said 3 years ago?
Yeah.
What made you move?
Series of fortunate events.
Lovely. Very cryptic.
Well, I think when you grow up in South Africa, there's a lot of discussion around moving, around other places in the world being better. It's a third world country, all of that jazz. So the popular discourse is around moving to, a more established country. I never actually thought I would do it. You always explore it like, one day when I'm big. But the opportunity came, everything kind of just fell into place for me to move. And Australia is so much like South Africa. The weather is very similar. Obviously, you've got, English as a first language, etc. So that really makes it almost a soft landing.
Yeah. What's it like growing up in South Africa?
I think it's interesting, and I'm almost weary to speak for all South Africans. I mean, there are 11 official languages in South Africa. There are so many different cultures and stuff. Like, even for me to say, so I'm Afrikaans, and for me to speak for kind of all Afrikaans people is already kind of a step too far. For me personally, it was an interesting journey. Like it's amazing in that I grew up in a small town, which gave me like kind of the country roots. But there's always an underlying discussion of scarcity and even maybe violence. Like as a result, I've actually stopped reading news, etc., because it's often quite negative and violent, particularly there. Stats like a woman is raped in South Africa every 83 seconds, things like that. So eventually you just try and not feed that beast. I mean, in the 27 odd years that I spent there was a lot of transformation. I was born just before Nelson Mandela became president and the country, moved into a democracy. But I don't really recall what that was like. So I've got like the stories that my family tell, and obviously the culture talks about, and then you've got all of these other stories of conflict, of reconciliation. It's an interesting thing to have not experienced that, but to see the aftermath. So it's diverse, but also quite complex.
Do you miss it? Do you miss home?
I miss my family. Yeah. I find people here to be a lot more friendly than back home. So I miss my family and the big animals.
Of course.
Yeah.
We did a kind of safari trip a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it was, I wasn't overly bothered about doing it, to be honest. But when we did do it and when we started to go, it was just the most incredible thing. And I would encourage anybody, if it's on your bucket list, do it sooner rather than later before, you might not be able to.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing country as well, an amazing country. But you are right. One of my observations was just the huge sway from very, very wealthy to very, very poor, and how they are literally living on top of each other, those two communities. There's no kind of real disparity to it all.
Yeah.
So you can see how that scarcity and then would lead into the violent behaviour.
Yeah, so there's what they call the richest square mile in Africa, which is Sandton. And right next to it, there's Alexandria, which is perhaps one of the poorest square miles in Africa. So you've got that, like I said, kind of that diversity and almost that paradox between the two, constantly kind of pushing at each other.
Yep.
But in that, there's this room for opportunity and growth, and it adds a richness to it because of the complexity.
Yep.
So it's a very dynamic environment.
Very good. Very good. Looks like you miss it. You said that a few things fell into place that led you to move over here. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah. So when I was 18, I came over with the guy I was dating at the time. His mom lived in Australia, and he said, come on, let's go, visit mom. And so I came over and spent 3 weeks in Noosa.
Beautiful.
I mean, just kind of like fell in love, right? Like, that's heaven.
Understandable.
Yeah. And then went back home and never really gave it another thought. People kept talking about, moving to Australia, but I kind of just focused on studying, etc. But what ended up happening was there were riots at the public universities in South Africa when I was supposed to go. So my dad said, no, we can't have this. So he sent me to Monash. In South Africa, they've got a Monash campus. And so that's really where the stronger Australian affiliation really started for me. So I did a couple of degrees at Monash and kind of really got a taste of that international experience and exposure. And then it took a couple of years, and I thought, let me just apply for PR and, see, like, have a backup plan. I'll have 4 years to, like, decide if I want to come over, like, applied for the PR, got it in 9 months, came over to Australia, spent a week in Melbourne and a week in Sydney just to feel like where I'd prefer to live. Obviously, I chose the right place, Sydney.
Of course.
But then literally went home, couldn't sleep, applied for a single role, which I found, I think, on LinkedIn. And 10 days later, I had it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what were you studying at Monash that then enabled you to apply for this role?
Okay, so there's about 5 to 7 year gap between when I finished studies and when I applied for this role. But at Monash, so I did a degree and a half in English, communications and philosophy, and then backed that up with a double honours in communications and philosophy.
Wow, that's deep.
So, yeah. And throughout all of that time, like, I did a whole bunch of interesting stuff, like freelance as an automotive journalist. So all of that kind of played into me starting my own business in marketing and comms, which then got me into a marketing and comms role in Australia, in Sydney.
So you did all your journalism and things in South Africa?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So I can't just breeze over the fact that you're an automotive journalist.
Not
So what exactly is an automotive journalist? Or what sort of field did you do?
So back in the day when I did it, it mostly entailed going on amazing launches and test driving cars and writing about them. So that would include everything from the launch of a Chana Benny, or a Tata or whatever, to an R8 or an Aston Martin. Like, I drove every Aston Martin launch between 2007 and 2011.
You take them off the road?
I did an R8, but not. That's awesome. Don't bust me.
And I was reading your bio, and you put it at 18 years old, you actually became a published writer.
Yeah.
Was that your automotive side of things?
So that was my first step into automotive journalism, but that was actually so it was a front page story for a national trucking magazine. It was really glamorous. But
What, the truck?
Exactly. But it was my way in. And it was a beautiful convergence, really, because it was about human trafficking in trucks in Africa. Oh. And I managed to actually track down a human trafficking victim and go through his story of how he moved from Zimbabwe at the time in a truck into South Africa. And, people dying along the way and them throwing out the bodies, in the wild, etc. As it was quite an intense.
That's heavy.
Yeah, experience.
Did that change your view on anything?
I think it just solidified what I already knew. There's a massive trend of trafficking in Africa, and just to hear it firsthand makes it so much more real and visceral. So it kind of stuck with me to this day.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned that you were studying communications. What do you enjoy about that? Why go into communications?
I think I enjoy, like, there's so much of it I enjoy. I think the humanities in general fascinates me in terms of why do we think the way we think? Why do we do what we do? How do you influence that? I learned, for example, concepts like, perception is 9/10 of reality. It's about how you say what you say, what people perceive. They will move accordingly. So communications is about how you put the words together to get a specific meaning across and ultimately influence action or understanding, whether that be, in an intrapersonal or intrapersonal or interpersonal basis, and then how that applies to business and commerce and actually effecting change.
So is that why you like the marketing side of things? Because you can influence how things are communicated, influence decisions.
Yes. To me, marketing is a convergence really of getting the right product at the right price in front of the right people at the right time. And that involves, I think sometimes people think marketing is about manipulation. And there's an influence side of it for sure. But for me, that involves informing people. So you've got to kind of speak to them in their language where they're at. If I start speaking Afrikaans to you, you're not going to get the value that I bring regardless of what I say. So I've got to make sure that I craft the message so that it actually resonates with you and then drives you to come to your own conclusion about whether, there's fit or not.
My lecturer at my university said marketing was exploitation and bullshit. So you said it so much beautifully.
Well, I think it's all about how you do it and the intention behind it.
Yeah.
If the intention is just to kind of hard sell, people can sense that.
Yeah.
So that raises a good point, actually, because you obviously speak Afrikaans. So English is your second language?
That's right. Yeah.
So was that difficult to study? Do you know what I mean? Is that difficult to study communications in a language that's secondary to you as well?
So I was kind of fortunate in that I was in what they call a dual medium school, which means we had Afrikaans as a first language option and then also English.
Right.
So at the age of about 16, I flipped from going purely Afrikaans educated to English, which was a really interesting thing because not all concepts just translate directly.
Yeah.
But that kind of set me up for success. I've always been I've had an aptitude for languages, so it was a reasonably smooth transition for me to go from the one language to the other. Right, enough exposure. Obviously, TV and everything is still English is the dominant language.
Yep.
So that enabled me to then just study and naturally progress into English. And you read English books and stuff, so it's quite natural. But there are some purists who kind of stick to their language. Even my brother spent his whole school career and then some of his uni life in Afrikaans and then had to move over when he started working. So I think that's interesting. Once you've solidified all of your knowledge in one language and then all of a sudden you've got to write English emails that are quite technical, for example, that might be daunting.
Yeah. And what does the Afrikaans language sound like?
Ek kan Afrikaans praat as jy wil, which means I can speak Afrikaans if you'd like.
So do many people still speak it over here? Well, over here in Australia. I know there's obviously a big South African community here, but do people still speak Afrikaans?
People do still. There's actually a really alive Afrikaans population and culture back in South Africa. But I mean, in Perth, they have Afrikaans schools, they have Afrikaans churches.
Really?
Yeah.
Sounds very Dutch.
It is. So it's a Creole version of Dutch, actually. So it's Dutch with a bit of a French influence that was obviously localized to South Africa. But I have some Dutch friends, and depending on where they come from in the Netherlands, I can understand them quite easily, and they can understand me.
Wow.
And the others can't at all.
Yeah.
It's also obviously the pace at which you speak.
So let's go back to your move to Australia. How's and look, we've done the same thing. We're both expats. How scary was it for you?
So I think it was such a roller coaster in how quickly it happened that I instinctively went into change management. So literally, I sat my parents down 2 days before I anticipated the job offer, and I said to them, "Look, guys, this is legitimately going to happen." And they're like, "Yeah, yeah." And then 2 days later, obviously, it did. And I had 6 weeks in which to pack up everything, and I came over here with 70 kilograms worth of clothes, mostly, a couple of books, and that was, some sentimentals, and that was it. I think I saw it as an adventure, but what's scary is leaving behind the things that matter, your family.
Yeah.
My father didn't cry at his own dad's funeral. He cried the day I left. And like that kind of stuff, are you doing the right thing? The Afrikaans culture is kind of based on the bedrock of respect, responsibility, discipline. As the oldest, child, it's kind of my responsibility to be there, look after the family, etc. And obviously now it's still early days. My parents are quite young. It's not really a problem. But as you move on in life, how do you do that remotely? What kind of pressure do you now put on your sibling who's around and has to kind of step up on your behalf? Those kinds of things. Like, how do you love from afar? So that for me is like almost the most daunting part. Obviously, the time difference, etc., doesn't help.
What is the time difference?
9 hours now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there plans to move back to SA?
No.
None?
Absolutely not. Categorically.
Just to confirm, people do know that in your world. That's the case. Oh, I was hearing it first.
So I sometimes fantasize about retiring there. There are beautiful places. And the landscape is so rich. Imagine going and retiring in Stellenbosch with all the wineries. We call them wine farms, but I know everyone here calls them wineries.
I like the word wine farm.
That's what you're doing. You're basically farming wine.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Franschhoek is next door to that,
Yes.
which is the most sublime place in the world. It's amazing.
You've been there?
Yeah.
that the
Absolutely
winery?
beautiful. Yeah, there's actually
Of course you've been there.
There's loads of wine farms, but there's actually a car museum. There's a guy that has probably, I don't know, maybe 6 barns of cars. I'll show you pictures afterwards.
Yeah.
But amazing. It's a beautiful place. And very because I'm going to get this wrong, but I think Franschhoek means French corner.
Yeah.
In Dutch.
Yep.
Is that right?
French
so
is
it's actually
French.
so all the signs
corner.
are in French. A lot of the restaurants, a lot of the food there is French. Beautiful part of the world. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really special. So retiring, somewhere around there could be amazing. Obviously, with the rand dollar exchange, it's so easy to dream about doing something like that.
So other than weather, have you found any similarities between SA and Australia?
I think there are pockets of similarities. Obviously, both regions are very into their sport, for example. World Cup. Which
Anyway, that's all we've got time for today.
That was a great stab. That was awesome.
But more than like if you go one level deeper, Australia strikes me as like local Australians strike me as people who are quite family orientated, who are community focused, and that is very much at the core of South Africa, and I would go as far as saying most African countries. There's this concept in South Africa, and it spreads beyond the South African borders, called ubuntu. And directly translated, that means I am because you are. So I exist because of you. Almost like this whole
Cogito ergo sum, isn't it? Philosopher Descartes or something said that as well.
Cogito ergo sum. Yeah. So that's I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
So this is same but different in that it's like
That's an Aussie phrase.
because of you I exist. I couldn't exist without you.
Yeah.
You could take it as far as like you have to observe me for me to exist, right? So you could take it that far, but also for me it translates into I stand on the shoulders of giants. Like I'm a product of every person who's ever touched my life, whether that be directly or indirectly. And that community collectivism I see in Australia with Aussies.
You mentioned the word community. I was watching a video, the 101 Voices, where you had this kind of 7-minute little interview. It was lovely. And you talk a lot about community and networking there. You actually mentioned that concept. How important would you say is having a community, having a network when you are going through your life, going through the journey?
I'm going to put it right up there. To me, it's extremely important. I would tie community with connection, and I think connection is it's a universal need, and I've seen that play out in my life here. Two specific examples. The first was I was here 8 months and I got mugged.
Really?
Can you believe that? South African woman gets mugged in Sydney.
There's some irony in that, isn't
You
there?
got it.
From what
You're
you were just
telling me.
saying.
Also things like, I at that stage I'd done Krav Maga, so this I should have avoided this. Secondly, I was on the Prime Minister Street in Kirribilli, which is literally Kirribilli Avenue.
Wow.
So again, like what an oddball experience. But what that did for me is it reiterated to me how connected I actually was to the community here. Strangers paid for my locksmith to get back into my house, at 11 o'clock on a Monday night. So all of a sudden, like the community rising around you, crying with you at work, etc., because of the trauma of it all, that really helped me feel connected to the place. So whereas in that moment, I felt like I was totally alone. I didn't know the emergency number. I couldn't call my father or my brother. Like, what do you do? I called my sales director at the time because that's all. I didn't have, who do you call?
Yeah.
8 months into, your new life. So I think that's a good example of how community and connection can play out. I also find it particularly interesting here that people, despite this whole focus on community and collectivism, don't seem to be all that connected. I've seen that firsthand in my volunteer hugging that I think I mentioned to you.
That's actually one of my questions.
Yes, we're going to get into that a bit deeper.
So there used to be an organization in Australia called Hugs for Change, and literally a bunch of us would kind of, go to Pitt Street Mall on a Saturday and stand there for 2 or 3 hours with our arms like widely open, blindfolded, and whoever wants to come by and needs a hug comes by and gets a hug. And the first lady I ever hugged cried in my arms.
Wow. So you're blindfolded.
I'm blindfolded, so I to this day don't know what she looked like. I only obviously know what she felt like. And
have you got people watching you to make sure that?
yes,
Yeah. Well, I've never heard of this.
it's interesting when you tell people about this. The instinct is, oh, but imagine all the freaks. No, it's
sad that people's mind goes there.
Yeah, I think people maybe joke around about it, but in reality, it's actually, to me, it's almost a sacred experience where people understand, oh, hold on, this group is trying to do something good. And so they show up in the same energy, if that makes sense, or with the same intention. So on that specific day, I stood there for 2 hours. I hugged about 120, 130 people, and 4 of them cried.
4 people cried.
Are you allowed to talk?
Yeah, I was gonna
Are you allowed
say.
to kind of go?
So, yes, you are. You almost. I try not to.
Right.
Because I don't know how much permission I have to just all of a sudden, coach a random stranger on the side of the road, kind of thing.
That's fair.
So for me, the intention is a lot more to show up and just be there for them. So the first time that happened, I didn't know what to do. Like, what do you do? But as I kind of settled into the rhythm, I started like, I held on to them and like hum a song, or, you try and comfort them and show them that you're there without any kind of judgment. It's just one person showing up for another person. But it's definitely an interesting experience. And I believe those may have been people who, haven't been touched in a while. A lot of us here don't have family or aren't as strongly connected. Maybe it's an international student who, hasn't had a hug in a while. I think asking for hugs and asking for help when you're in that space can be quite stigmatized. So that may be a reason, but who knows? I'll never know.
So how did you get into that?
I saw something online. I'm an avid volunteer.
Yeah.
Volunteer. I think my first real volunteer experience was when I wore the panda suit for WWF for Earth Hour. I'll show you pictures after.
Gotta say that.
I actually went to the wrestling. When he went WWF, I was like, what character was that? What character was in the panda suit? Now I get it.
Just doing a massive suplex. Brilliant.
And that was here in Australia?
That's
or that
John
was in,
Cena territory.
I do go off on tangents. That was here in Australia.
I'm peace loving, yeah. No.
Look, I don't know where you get the time to do stuff. I still want to come back to know what this Krav McGrath thing is.
Maga.
Yeah, Krav McGrath.
Krav McGrath.
Anyway, yeah, giving it all of that. Anyway, going back to the community thing, do you think being an expat, it heightens that need for a community?
Totally. I think I arrived in Australia and all of a sudden there's this blank slate, right? And you get to design your life almost the way, or redesign your life the way you'd want to. I see some people, some South Africans even, go back straight to kind of old habits, almost recreate their old home back here and expect it to be same. For me, I try to approach it from an automotive mindset in that I had been in what we call a bakkie, which you guys call a ute, right? I'd been driving a ute. I can't now come and try and drive a ute in Australia. No, this is a convertible. I should be driving it differently. The terrain is different. The map is different. So let's experience what that's like. Let's see how fast I can go 0 to 100 here as opposed to, in my ute back in South Africa. So that's kind of it's still a vehicle, but you can do it differently. And so for me, that meant putting new structures in place, new foundations, friendships obviously being one of them, hobbies being another. I explored so many different things, and then started like collecting people, and that made this feel like home for me. The people.
Was there anything of Liz that you left back in South Africa? Because it sounds like you almost reinvent yourself. It's almost Liz 2.0.
Yeah, I think there's an intentionality this time around, in that when you grow up and you stay in this kind of same place, there's habit. You do stuff because you drive the same way your mom used to drive or whatever. Whereas here, it's in fact Daniel Kahneman, who's a behavioral economist and a Nobel Prize winner, actually speaks about like thinking fast and slow. And in this, he speaks about like system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. System 1 thinking being kind of your knee-jerk reaction, that's what you're used to, just kind of your old patterns. And system 2 is more creative and articulate in its thinking. So it takes a little bit longer and it processes more. And for me, it's almost moving from one to the other. So all of a sudden, everything is new. So you've got to be a bit more intentional and considerate. Do I want to stay in Potts Point, or do I want to, like the whole which side of the bridge you should live on debate, right? That's something you might not consider as much if you're local. So I think I approached this using everything I'd learned, obviously, in my life in South Africa, but a lot more intentionally.
Okay. And where did you go to start to hang out, to collect, I love that term, to collect your friends?
So firstly, I was really fortunate in that I landed in an amazing work family. A couple of Aussies actually in the team, but everyone treated me like I was a part of the family. I was invited to my boss's home. Like I said, in a moment of crisis, I felt safe enough to call my 50-year-old head of sales, while he was sleeping next to his wife to just, assist me. So that was the first foundation. Like it was really a soft landing from that perspective. And then I started obviously reaching out and with hobbies and stuff. So I started volunteering at TEDx, something which I was involved in back in South Africa. So I knew I anticipated meeting like-minded people. And I did to a great extent. Also, that obviously gives you a whole different experience of Sydney. You meet in new places, you hear of new ideas and people, etc. So that was one way. The other was I took up a whole bunch of different classes, things like sailing, Spanish. I still don't speak Spanish. Anyway, it was, I made some friends, and that was the amazing bit. And then from there, it kind of just escalates. Snowball effect, really.
Yeah. So let's go back to this martial art. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it.
Krav Maga or capoeira?
Oh, we can do both. There's two things I'm not even going to try and repeat, but what's one of them and what's the other one?
Brilliant.
So Krav Maga is something I did back in South Africa. It's Israeli.
Very big there, isn't it?
It's reasonably. But look, again, there's an undercurrent of self-protection, needing, obviously the whole, conversation is different there. So I did it because I wanted to not feel vulnerable, particularly as a female moving around alone, etc. So that's kind of where it started for me. A lot of people do self-defense classes. I preferred the idea of Krav Maga. It was a bit intimidating because I was a girl and I was the only female in the class, which is intimidating for both the males and the females, for me and the males in the class. They don't want to spar with you because they're scared of hurting you. You feel like you're kind of a little out because you're the only girl in the group. You can see how the males accommodate you. So that's a whole interesting experience in itself. But yeah, so Krav Maga is Israeli street fighting. Basically, there aren't many rules. That being said, my school taught the rule that if you're fighting, you've already lost. The whole point is to have such an advanced peripheral sensory experience that you can pick up on any threats, which is obviously then why when I got mugged in Kirribilli, I was like, what just happened? I was trained to avoid this.
Is that because you did drop your guard though?
I think so. Also, they were 10, 16-year-old boys.
Oh, lads.
Yeah, and I totally did not see that coming. And in fact, it's kind of interesting because they tried to push me to the ground and didn't succeed. So I turned around to see what was happening, and there was this young boy standing in front of me, and I could just see the fear in his eyes. And all I wanted to do in that moment, instead of, protecting myself, moving swiftly, whatever, I wanted to hug the kid. Like I could see how scared he was.
Petrified he was.
Yeah, he was more scared than I was. So it's like, okay, come, let me hug you. I can see, it's okay. Obviously, it didn't go that way.
Wow.
But yeah, I still chased them down the streets after. Yeah.
And then what was the other one you mentioned? Capoeira.
Capoeira.
Jesus.
Nothing
Like
poo about it.
sauce that you put on sushi. I love it.
Capoeira is a Brazilian martial art. As I was saying, prior to this recording, it's like a lot of people call it Brazilian breakdancing because of the movement and the music. So it was developed off the back of the Brazilian slaves. They needed a way to stay fit and conditioned to fight, and they obviously couldn't do that openly. So they started using music and then movement. It's quite acrobatic, actually, and that was obviously an outlet for them. And actually, I would go as far as saying it probably significantly influenced their mental health because of the fact that they were able to move. They had that whole community vibe. So once again, here we go with the community. They had the whole community vibe. There's literally a ring of people that sit around you, play music, and it was an outlet for them, as well as a way for them to stay healthy and strong with the goal of overthrowing, their keepers, their masters.
So you do that. You're still doing the sailing. You're still doing languages. You're still dancing.
So I, unfortunately, as a result of COVID, I can't dance.
Yep.
So
that's all right. I couldn't dance before COVID. So it's okay.
I'm sure I can teach.
That's why we both.
No, you can't.
Oh, really?
That's why we're both DJs. You just give it these ones instead. You don't need to win.
Yeah. So when COVID, so I used to dance kind of as a sport, as a hobby, about 18 to 20 hours a week. You kind of batch everything into one. It's your social, it's your exercise, it's moving meditation for me, all in the same time. So, but then when COVID hit, you can't be cheek to cheek with anyone, particularly not 5 different strangers. So that was really an interesting place to be because all of a sudden I couldn't move the way I'm used to moving, both kind of on an emotional level. the joy of the dance. And then on a physical level, all of a sudden you go from a lot of exercise to no exercise at all. And so I needed something else. So I've always been an avid walker. And like as I was walking one day in Bondi, a capoeira instructor came over to me and said, like, hey, you look really strong, and I've seen you walk here many times. Don't you want to come and try capoeira? And I decided it's perfect. Like, why not, try something new? It's dance, it's strength, it's conditioning, it's music all in one, and it's no contact. So you can actually do it during
So when
COVID.
he asked you, did he like swing over in front of you and go, all right, Liz, you ready? Let's go do it. Like,
He
how does
just-
that happen? You're just walking down the street. You'll be good at capoeira.
So
No one's ever said that to me. I can't even pronounce it, so I'm not going to say it.
Capora or something, wasn't it?
capoeira.
Anyway,
So Liz, you mentioned before how you unidentify, re-identify yourself.
Yeah.
So when you've come here, so you a different Liz. Have you re-identified yourself here? Are you different compared to what you were back in SA?
I definitely think I'm different. I think in my opinion, identities evolve, right? You
Yeah.
have your core. The values remain the same. Everything in my life still pivots around family and people and community and honesty and integrity and alignment. Those things don't change. I think
core
how
values.
Yeah, I think how you express them might change. What you lean into, and again, this is a very personal choice. Whether like I said, some people come over and they just kind of recreate the comfort of the past. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to just experience same old, same old. I wanted, and I got the opportunity here to speak to Irish people and Scottish people and Mexican people, and now my favorite food actually happens to be Brazilian food. So, and that was obviously way before capoeira exposure. So it's, for me, I would say I'm almost a larger, richer version of myself.
Yeah.
Because I'm driven by this natural curiosity to experience new things, and I'm almost I'm very much the person who will press every single button just to see what happens.
Yeah.
Like, people would tell me, no, don't do it, don't do
touch
it.
it. Oh, now I want to touch it even more.
so where does that come from? Why are you that kind of person?
I think it's a playfulness. To me, there is magic everywhere. So I want to see that. Like, I want, the only way for me to know is to actually experience it. You can tell me it's amazing, but until I've actually experienced it, or you can tell me it's downright stupid, but I need to see for myself, right? I need to see for myself. So it's a very perhaps visceral feedback. I need that visceral feedback.
And has that been an evolution since moving here, or has that always been part of your character?
It's always been a part of my character.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm growing up, I always used to say I question everything. And I think that's where, that's why I studied philosophy, for example. I thought I might get some answers.
Yeah.
4 years later, I only had more questions. It's a total disaster.
Yeah.
If my father knew what he was spending his money on, he'd never have paid for it.
So I want to kind of go back to Africa. Well, South Africa, but you were in the top 30. You won an award, didn't you, for the top 30 female entrepreneurs in Africa?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
That's fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
We do have a round of applause little button.
I don't know which one it is because one of it actually
Can I?
laughs and I
Can I?
don't want to do that.
Brilliant.
How did that come about?
So, short version is my inability to say
got
no.
Time. We've got time.
So as I mentioned to you, I started my career freelancing as a side gig, and that kind of just developed. So after I graduated, I took on a corporate gig, but it really just wasn't my vibe. And so I decided to take this freelancing thing a little more seriously, and I was able to do that. And after about a year and a half of doing that, I was working 18-hour days straight through Christmas and New Year. I very, very distinctly remember writing 30,000 social media posts in one December. for 9 shopping centres across South Africa,
That's
1
more
year.
than me.
Pardon?
That's more than me. No, than I do. Sorry.
So I realized that December that wasn't sustainable for me. I couldn't keep working like a machine, but at the same time, I didn't want to say no to opportunity. Like the maximizer in me knew there's more to this. And that's kind of when I started building out an agency. So I went from kind of one-man band, just floating around, taking on projects, to being, again, more intentional about how I channel the network that I've got and the inbound to actually maximize value for more than just me. And initially that looked like hiring moms who needed work-life balance. So I could give them that flexibility. I couldn't, as a small business, you can't always compete and give them the biggest salary or the best perks, but you can kind of accommodate their lifestyles and try and add value in that way. And that's how I started it. I worked until I saved, a single resources salary for a year, and then hired someone, and then, kind of organically scaled it from there. And then a couple of years in, one of my clients actually nominated me for this program that included an accelerator program off the back of your selection. And so I was selected as one of the top 30 emerging female entrepreneurs. So I hadn't made it, I was making it kind of, or at least trying to make it.
And what's for maybe the people that haven't come across the term, an accelerator program? What does that mean? What is that?
So accelerator programs nowadays are more diverse and can include or entail taking a startup and putting them through an accelerator to give them the resources to formalize their business and take it to the next level. Or, and I actually now work on accelerators too, one of which being the Workplace Accelerator for Asia Pac HR Tech. And that's about taking high potential businesses that are already, that are past the startup phase to a scale up phase. Mm-hmm. So it's where you pull in the right resources, advisors, mentors, etc., to really accelerate the growth and development of businesses.
Okay, thank you for that. How did it feel being nominated for this award? Because going back to what you've been saying, you're community-led, you're curious, you don't say no to anything, you're adventurous, you want to live life to the full. How did it feel to get recognition for basically doing things that you love?
It was a humbling experience for me. It also, more than anything, gave me the opportunity to learn more things. And
Why stop now?
Exactly.
Well, totally. Like it's a whole, it literally accelerates your learning and it accelerates your network or your networking. So what was lovely was having someone who had experienced your value proposition and what you bring to the table say, hey, I recognize the good that you do here to the extent where I'd actually like to do something good for you. That reciprocity is really amazing.
And is that what you want to start paying back? It sounds like what you're doing now in your HR tech, which is the first time I've heard that term, by the way, is actually giving back all your expertise to these scale ups because I think you're working on 5 or 6 now, aren't you?
So yes, for the accelerator there, the specific workplace accelerator, there are 7 across Asia Pac. But then I also work with a couple of other HR tech businesses that's not involved in that accelerator, just in a marketing and growth capacity. Yes, I think definitely I have an innate instinct to give back. But more than anything, it's just really around contributing. I don't really see it as having all that much to give. It's more just like, okay, like how can we participate? How can we grow together? How can we make this better together?
And what is HR tech?
So human resource technology.
Yep.
So it's all of the technology involved in everything from recruitment all the way through to employee engagement, payroll, etc. So I work on clients like Smart AI, which is a recruitment chatbot, which sits at the kind of top of funnel of the recruitment experience. So where the candidate applies or the applicant applies, goes through the process, communicates with a chatbot that takes them through the steps in the application process, helps screen, helps applicants who are successful post the screening phase to set up their interviews, etc. So that's one business. Another business or another businesses or sectors that I've worked in is background screening. So that involves once they're kind of been screened and shortlisted now, and we want to hire them, now we go through the process of background screening, making sure they don't have a criminal record, or if they do, having that conversation with them. In Australia, actually, as far as I know, you're not allowed to discriminate against someone with a criminal record. And it's more about just having an understanding with your applicants about their history, and making sure that they have the integrity to tell you about anything in particular. So that's in background screening. In Europe and the UK, I actually also sit on an advisory board for a business called Equip, and they're an employee engagement platform. So it literally, across the board, anything that involves people and culture within a business, HR tech.
Okay, thank you for that. And that goes back to your influencing decisions and people that you were talking about earlier. So you're marketing internally to staff and employees, and being able to influence their experience, how they're onboarded, their recruitment piece.
Yes, you say that, but it has an internal and an external focus. In the last couple of years, the concept of employer branding has really come to the fore, and that's about how do I position myself, or how, as a business, how would you position yourself as an employer, and the value, and literally the employer value proposition that you bring to your existing team, but also how do you attract new talent. So prior to COVID, obviously that was a really big thing. We were in a talent shortage. So how do you compete how do I compete as a smaller business against someone like Atlassian or Google or Facebook, who are really sexy brands? It's about that employer value proposition and your employer brand generally. And then that also spills over into your employees and your applicants become your consumers. They eventually buy, they could buy from you, or they talk to people who buy from you. So that whole ecosystem of really, I almost want to say, amplifying your brand and your values. That's what I'm quite interested in.
And why do you think that's all of a sudden come to the forefront? Why haven't we not done that, spoken about that for forever? So, for example, if I'm going to go for a job at an airline and I don't get it, but that airline ultimately wants me to be a customer. So what you're saying, they've got to communicate to me why I didn't get it, but also kind of keep me as an advocate. So when I do choose to fly, that I think of them first. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes. So what we see is that if I have a negative experience as a candidate, I'm less likely to go and buy a ticket from that airline. If I don't know, the people at Qantas never came back to me, I might have negative things to say about them. I'm going to talk to 5 of my friends about how horrible the experience was, and that just generally influences your brand reputation. It's a lot easier to maintain a good reputation than to change a bad one. Or rectify, anything you've done wrong. So I think a lot has changed. I think there's more power in the hands of applicants, and just generally expectations. User experience generally has developed and advanced. So I expect the same experience if I'm buying on Amazon to if I'm applying for a role anywhere. I expect some kind of feedback, for example. This is very topical actually in my industry at the moment. Most candidates don't hear back. You apply for 100 different roles, and you're lucky if you hear back from 2 of them. Whether that be your application has progressed, or we're sorry you don't fit the bill, or whatever it is. 90% of the time people don't actually hear back. And that's the first thing. So, I particularly in the COVID climate where there's a lot of uncertainty, there's so many people without work, there's this crisis of all of a sudden, financially, what do we do? There's this urgency around getting work as an applicant. How you treat people in that situation becomes really important. How do you communicate as openly and as humanely and respectfully as possible, even if it's just, hey, look, thanks, we're not going to progress your application at this stage. Just knowing that already enables the candidate to make more informed decisions about other applications.
And do you think companies are coming to the party on this? Are they starting to understand, or are they still? Is there still, because it almost sounds like a bit of a power kind of shift, or is that market dependent? So you're saying because there's lots of candidates that are available now, companies kind of don't have to, or is it still in the power of the applicant?
So I think you say companies don't have to. I think companies never have to. I think companies should choose to. I think it's a courtesy, and it speaks about their brand DNA. So if it's easy for a talent acquisition professional or recruiter just to ignore a bunch of applicants, what does that say about the business? Maybe it says that a recruiter is totally overwhelmed, and that's already that's a red light right there, right? What I see, honestly, is a very progressive HR, talent acquisition, recruitment industry where they are very much trying to do, quote unquote, the right thing by everyone. It's about, there are all these kind of plates that you're spinning all at the same time. How do you best manage this high volume of applicants, give them feedback, do them justice? How do you get the right fit between your applicants and the role you're applying for or you're recruiting for? And then in terms of culture, how does that scale in the business's culture? And with the whole remote hiring, remote working thing, it's a whole new ballgame in terms of how you bring all of that together to really fuel the human capital, in a business and enable. People are the lifeblood of any organization. So how you deal with them from beginning to end is really important.
Yeah, I agree. So what does the ideal look like in that space for you? So if you had a blank piece of paper that you could draw it out and then we could build some software around it, what would that look like?
I don't know. I think it's complex. It would be grounded on or it would rest on the intent of treating every applicant with a great deal of respect. So how can we, and in fact, one of the businesses that I work for, Smart AI, that I do consulting for, they do exactly this. It's about being clear with the candidate every step of the way. Look, this is the next step. Thank you for your information. We'll get back to you, etc. And automating really and facilitating that entire process. What that allows is the recruiter actually has more time to do the relationship side of it, and make sure they have an adequate understanding of the role, understand the people that have come through the process, what their values are, what their drivers are, how do we match all of that together. So for me, it would be an individual focused approach to hiring that would be informed and powered by technology, because that's the only way it's going to be scalable, that aligns again with the business's culture, needs, and growth plans.
So what's your thoughts on, I guess, when you look at some of the older, more traditional things we've done, CVs, 3 or 4 interviews. Do you think that kind of stuff is now becoming redundant because we've got LinkedIn, we can do videos? Is it more about the journey rather than just highlighting? Because they used to say just put your CV, making sure it's on one page, but you couldn't put all your stuff on one page, could you?
So I am always very daunted when I have to, try and and encapsulate everything that I am onto 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of paper. I actually think it's really limiting. Maybe for some specialists, my father is a good example. He spent 30 years of his life in oil and gas with one business. So maybe he could just have a timeline, and 10 key achievements. But in our industry, in HR generally, there's this concept of bringing your whole person to work. And what's interesting, if you look at someone like myself, my profile extends far beyond my 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Firstly, I never work 9 to 5. And secondly, my volunteering and my hobbies and my network all feed back and empower me to be better at my job, more efficient, more productive, etc. So in our industry, there's definitely a move away from the piece of paper that is a resume. There are so much research around people lying on resumes.
Yeah.
So it's ultimately, if you will, it's a marketing document.
Yeah.
Right. It's embellished. In fact, I once had a conversation with a group of professionals, and I was saying, like, how do I position myself on my resume? And someone said, oh, well, just lie about this and this. And I was like, what do you mean lie? And they're like, that's what we all do. So, that's kind of like, I think that's to some extent the norm, is to try and at least position all of your strengths, but just hide all of your weaknesses. And hiring managers and HR and TA and recruiters have all kind of caught on to that. So that's the one thing is the marketing document that is a resume. But then you've also got recruiters not having enough time to screen those resumes. So on average, they say a recruiter spends 7 seconds looking at a resume. So even if I did manage to condense my entire life experience and value onto a piece of paper or 4 pages of paper, you would only spend 7 seconds looking at it. You're not going to, you are not going to get a feel for who I am. So as an applicant, I'd much rather you do a couple of screening questions, maybe a video interview, which can be asynchronous. In fact, that's how I was hired in Australia. I did a psychometric test, which was followed by a 5-minute video interview, asynchronous. And then the next conversation was, we love everything about you. Would you join our C-suite? So that's the trend that we're seeing. Video interviewing is more popular than ever, psychometrics, etc. Now, again, it also depends very much on what kind of industry and role you're hiring for, right? There are high volume roles, more kind of blue collar roles that don't require this level of sophisticated screening. It's about having someone who, can pick up 20 kilograms and maybe has a couple of white cards or whatever. It's a different profile. And so therefore that requires a different hiring process entirely. Also, the volume of applications that you'll receive there will be significantly higher than if I'm recruiting for a CEO or a COO of a very niche industry. And ultimately what you need out of the interview and out of the resume is very different.
Okay. So I want to get on to, again, just with the life you've led, there's got to be a few cock-ups there. There's got to be a few, wish I hadn't have done that, or, I've pressed all the buttons, but this one was actually wrong. Have you got any examples that come to mind?
Yeah, I once pressed a button where I sent the wrong email to 300 people.
That was literally a button.
Yeah, it was literally a button. It was literally a button. It was fueled by my incapability of saying no. So I was pressed for time because I'd made a commitment that I shouldn't have. I should have pushed back, but instead I was like, okay, let's quickly do it. And I pressed the wrong button, and it was a balls up, because what had happened is I'd undone everything that my team had spent 8 months doing. So it was beautifully beautifully done up until that point, and then all of a sudden I messed up execution massively and sent a "sorry we missed you" email to 300 people who had actually attended our event, and some of them were like, "What do you mean? What do you mean you missed us? Like, we have photos with you." And so it sounds small, but when every detail was so perfect, dude, that's a pretty big branding faux pas right there.
Personal and company, I can imagine.
Yeah. You don't want to let your team down like that ever.
Yeah.
So that's one of many examples.
Nice. We'll leave that one there then. On the event side of things, I noticed in COVID you did this 24-hour brain food marathon. What the hell was that about?
That's a real highlight for me. It was the beautiful convergence of a close network of incredible people and a larger global community who all wanted to stand for something. So the whole idea was sparked off the back of a conversation with an Aussie recruitment events company that was one of my suppliers at the time, actually, saying, wow, in the midst of COVID, they're really experiencing a crisis situation, and they are not going to be able to deliver on their promises around their events, obviously, because we were all in lockdown. And from a cash flow perspective, they don't know what that means. And at that time, we were all quite distraught with the implications of lockdown, and events companies obviously being at the forefront of that. And so I was complaining about it and concerned about it, because this whole concept of Ubuntu, once again, if you are not okay, I am not okay, right? It influences me directly. If you're feeling pain, it's very difficult for me just to sit here and pretend I'm all good, right? And so, and especially in a community, in an industry in which we all are quite close knit. And so I was chatting to a friend of mine, Hung Lee, who is a recruitment influencer back in the UK, about it one day, and we were just kind of brainstorming, and this idea came up. Let's get everyone together so they can learn from each other. He's a podcaster. He has a massive following internationally, in fact, globally. In our industry, he has the platform to do this. And the idea, we were like, yes. And I don't think we really realized what we committed to at that point. And 3 weeks later, with the help of an incredible team of volunteers and a couple of sleepless nights, we had pulled together 110 international speakers, 80 sponsors who didn't actually contribute financially, but had the opportunity to showcase their technology and how it can help in times of COVID, and then also gave the audience special free, really, deals to help them through this process. Because if you think about it, in COVID, in fact, in the first couple of months of lockdown, 1 in 3 recruiters lost their jobs. That's a massive part of our industry gone. And that's just recruiters. We're not talking TA. We're not talking everyone else who was made redundant or went on to JobKeeper, etc. So what we saw was this trend where at that time, the UK was about 2 weeks ahead of Australia, and Australia would have been about 2 weeks ahead of South Africa again. So we could learn from each other.
You're talking about with the waves of...
Yes, of COVID,
Yeah.
yeah. And so as an HR, TA, recruitment community, we could, the Australian community, for example, could learn from what had happened in the UK. How had they managed to hold on to staff instead of to make them redundant, for example, to redeploy staff? Any learnings there could be applicable to us, and in 2 weeks' time, approximately, could have been applicable again to Africa, for example. So when you get everyone together, there's diversity in thought, there's that richness, and the community just really needed to feel connected, I think.
Yep.
And so the result was a 24-hour live stream event, which was insane. And that attracted 12,000 odd viewers from across the globe.
Wow.
We had, like I said, we had an amazing community of volunteers who co-hosted, assisted in marketing, technical support, etc., to pull this whole thing together. But for me, it was particularly rewarding because I got to work really closely with a small team of people that I love, that have become family, and that had this shared drive to help in a time that was really scary for most of us, and to connect, and then to see the community really almost carry us on their shoulders, and how everyone just pulled in, came together. There was a moment, you were talking about failures earlier. There was a moment, 40 long minutes, in fact, in 24 hours, where everything broke. It was 1:00 Australian time. So you can imagine, so Hung is sitting in the UK hosting live. We've got a couple of other hosts running simultaneously because we had 3 tracks, digital tracks running at the same time. And for 40 minutes, our system crashed. The technology we used had reached its max because nobody anticipates getting, 12,000 viewers, like live viewers. Yeah. I remember texting my parents, 2,000 viewers, 3,000 viewers. While they were back in South Africa in the middle of the night watching us. But for 40 minutes, it was just silence. And it's particularly distressing when it's remote. So I did not have any visibility around what's happening in the UK, and the host there trying to sort out the technology, calling up the support team, etc. So you're texting and you're trying to figure all of this out, and in between, the community obviously have no clue what's happening. But they stuck with us after the 40-minute silence. It was like a quick power nap for everyone. I aged about 10 years in 40 minutes.
Stressed.
Oh, jeez.
It would be a nightmare if you're sitting there not knowing what's going on and not being able to engage anybody to see if it's just you or if it's everybody. Yeah. That would be painful. So
we had other channels. So luckily we had social media in which we could keep communicating with our audience to say, look, we're troubleshooting. We'll be back online. This is what's happening next. But then that has a massive impact. So halfway through your 24 hours, now your whole agenda shifts. So you've got to so while this is happening, you've got to redeploy every session in that's loaded in the technology we used for this virtual conference, right? So all of that's happening in the back end. You're renegotiating with 50 odd speakers to make sure they now have their revised times while you're setting everything up, and you don't have visibility over what's happening. And it's just insane.
Yeah. You're still smiling, so I know it came out okay. You said at the start of this that you don't. Well, we spoke before we went online that you don't like to be fit. You don't fit into any boxes. I think I now know what you mean. I was going to ask what you mean by that, but I think after this hour, I know exactly what you mean. You are obviously a lady of many, many hats. I'm loving your onus on the whole community, the network, the always learning. I think the only box that you could be put in is one with many, 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 many buttons. So you can press them all. Before we wrap up, I'm going to ask my question around: if you can go for dinner, you have a table for 4 booked for somewhere. Who's the other 3 people at the table, and why?
Mum, dad, and brother, any day of the week.
That's fantastic to hear.
If not, I would go with something like the Dalai Lama, Elon Musk. It would be a toss-up between Michelle Obama and Tim Ferriss for that last seat.
I obviously understand the parents and family situation, the why. Why those other 4?
I think Elon Musk is again, same but different, right? South African who doesn't necessarily associate himself with the dogmatic view often associated with a South African. In fact, he doesn't call himself that at all. He associates as being American. And just his journey in terms of business and innovation, I don't always know so much about the leadership style. I think we have very different leadership styles. But I think he'd be fascinating to learn from. He's great at setting a vision and then pulling people together to
Execute it. Yeah.
exactly. So that would be my interest in talking to Elon Musk. Dalai Lama, I mean, come on. We haven't spoken about any of my yoga and silence retreats, etc. But I think the Dalai Lama is just really someone super selfless and sacred and almost childlike in his joy. And I think we all need a bit more of that. So hence the appeal. Tim Ferriss, oh my God, he's one of my favorites. Again, this whole like lifelong learning, I think he's fueled by that. He's very interested in hacking, everything from biohacking to growth hacking. He, in fact, often on his podcasts and in his books talk about philosophers like, Stoicism, etc. And that really resonates with me. He thinks very laterally, which I quite enjoy. So again, he's, in my opinion, he's not a specialist but a generalist. That makes him quite intriguing to me. Michelle Obama, because she's a strong female with incredible leadership skills. And I think she leads with empathy in a world where she was often under attack. So I'd love to explore that side of being strong. So she's feminine. She's two minority groups, obviously, feminine and of color. And she's strong. And she's had this whole life-changing transformation. I think that would be an interesting story.
There you go. Perfect. Well, Liz, thank you very much for your time. I think we're going to wrap up our Lifestyle Pirates episode here.
Thank you.
That was a hell of a lot to go through. There was a lot to think about. If people want to get hold of you, if they're listening to this and gone, wow, I want to take her for a drink to learn more about the martial arts. I'm not even going to try and pronounce them. Or the AR, the HR tech or AI. How do people get hold of you?
Find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Liz Van Zyl. VAN, next word, ZYL.
Awesome. Well, look, keep doing what you're doing. It's very exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing how these scale-ups go with you at the helm. Thank you very much for your time on Lifestyle Pirates.
Thank you.